Hi, I'm Oscar Villalon. I'm the managing editor of ZYZZYVA, and I'll be in conversation with Lori tonight. Before we begin, first of all, thank you all for coming out. Let me introduce Lori to you in an official manner. Lori Ostlund is the author of 2 books, the story collection The Bigness of the World, which received the Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction, the California Book Award for first fiction, and the Edmund White Award for debut fiction, and the novel which brings us here tonight, After the Parade, of which Kirkus, in his starred review, said, "Everything here aches, from the lucid prose to the sensitively traded characters to their beautiful and heartbreaking stories, an example of realism in its most potent iteration, not a neatly arranged plot orchestrated by an authorial god, but an authentic, empathetic representation of life as it truly is." Lori lives in San Francisco, and ZYZZYVA had the pleasure of publishing her story Clear as Cake in our issue number 97. So good to see you again, Lori.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it so much. And thank you, Oscar, for being here in particular. One of my favorite magazines is ZYZZYVA, and if you don't know it, I think there's a prop somewhere over there. You should know it. And thank you, Booksmith, for having me here tonight. This is such a great place to do a reading. So I'm just going to read briefly from a section near the beginning of the book. And I had wanted to read a different section, but Anne, my partner, was sure that I should read this section tonight. So I'm reading this section tonight. The good news is it's very near the beginning of the book, so there is not much you need to know, other than the fact that Aaron, who's the main character, at the beginning of the book has packed up a U-Haul and has left his partner, Walter, with whom he has been more than 20 years. They've been living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and so as this section begins, he is in his U-Haul, sort of driving through the western part of New Mexico and into California. Aaron, glasses. Aaron was in Gallup buying coffee when the sun rose, approaching Needles, California, when he fell asleep at the wheel, awakening within seconds to the disorienting sight of the grassy median before him. He swerved right, the truck shifting its weight behind him, and found himself on the road again, cars honking all around him, a man in a pickup truck jabbing his middle finger at him and screaming something that he took to be asshole. He was not the sort who came away from close calls energized, nor did he believe in endangering the lives of others. He took the next exit, checked into a motel in Needles, and was soon asleep, the heavy drapes closed tightly against the California sun. But as he slept, a series of thuds worked their way into his dreams. He woke suddenly, the room dark and still, and he thought maybe the thudding was nothing more than his own heart. It came again, loud and heavy, something hitting the wall directly behind him. A body, he thought, and then, not a body, a human being. He reached out and felt a lamp on the table beside the bed, then fumbled along its base for the switch. From the next room, he heard a keening sound, followed by the unmistakable thump of a fist meeting flesh. He slipped on his sneakers. Outside it was dusk. He ran down a flight of steps and turned left into the motel lobby. The woman at the desk was the one who had checked him in. He remembered the distrustful way she looked at him when he burst in and declared that he needed a room. So exhausted he could not recall his zip code for the paperwork. "Call the police," he said. She stared at him. "You need to call the police. A man in the room next to me is beating someone up, a woman, I think, his wife or girlfriend, someone." He could see now that beneath her heavy makeup she was young, maybe 20, the situation beyond anything for which either her receptionist training or meager years of living had prepared her. 911, he said slowly, like he was explaining grammar to a student. He reached across the counter, picked up the receiver and held it out to her. She looked left and right as if crossing the street. He knew that she was looking for someone besides him. At last, a switch seemed to flip on inside her. She took a breath and said, "Sir, you're in room 252, correct?" He shrugged to indicate that he didn't know, but she continued on, his uncertainty fueling her confidence. "It must be 253, that couple from Montana, but they had a child with them." "Is there a child?" she asked. "Just call," he said, and he ran back outside. When he got to room 253, he hesitated. The full weight of his good fences made good neighbors upbringing bearing down on him. He raised his hand and knocked hard at the door. The room went silent, and he knew that something was very wrong. "Hello," he called, making his voice louder because he had learned early on in teaching that volume was the best way to conceal a quaver. The receptionist came up the steps and stood watching, afraid, he knew, of the responsibility they shared, of the haste with which she had wedded her life to his. "Key," he mouthed, but she shook her head. He stepped back until he felt the walkway railing behind him, and then rushed at the door, doing this again and again until the chain ripped away and he was in. The receptionist's name was Britta. He had heard her spelling it for the policemen who took down their stories as they stood outside the door that Aaron had broken through minutes earlier. That night she knocked at his room door. "It's me, Britta," she called, without adding qualifiers, "the receptionist," or "we saved a boy's life together this afternoon." When he opened the door, she said, "I came to give you an update on Jacob." But she was carrying a six-pack of beer, which confused him. Still, he invited her in because he could not sleep, could not stop picturing the boy, Jacob, lying on the floor as though he simply preferred it to the bed, as though he had lain down there and gone to sleep. There had been blood, and the boy's arm was flung upward and out at an angle that only a broken bone would allow. The mother sat to the side, sobbing about her son from a distance, from the comfort of a chair. She was not smoking, but Aaron later thought of her that way, as a woman who sat in a chair and smoked while her husband threw her son against the wall. It was the husband who surprised him most, a small, jovial-looking man with crow's feet. Duck feet, a student had once called them, mistaking the bird, and a face that seemed better suited for laughing. He and Britta did not drink the beer she had brought, though he could see that she wanted to. "It's still cold," she said hopefully, as she set it down. He would not go further, would not slip a can from the plastic noose without his prompting. She was an employee, after all, used to entering these rooms deferentially. Aaron was relieved. He had left behind everything that was familiar, but at least he recognized himself in this person who would not drink beer with a teenager in a cheap motel room in Needles, California. The beer sat sweating on the desk between the television and the Gideon Bible. "Were you reading the Bible?" Britta asked, for of course she would know that it was generally kept tucked away in the bottom drawer of the desk. He felt embarrassed by the question, though he could see that she considered Bible reading a normal activity, one to be expected, given what had happened earlier. "Not really," he said, which was true. He'd spent the last 3 hours not really doing anything. When Britta knocked, he'd been sitting on the bed listening, the way he had as a child, just after his father died, and he lay in bed each night straining to hear whether his mother was crying in her room at the other end of the house. Some nights he heard her, gasping sobs that he would be reminded of as an adult when he overheard people having sex, while other nights there was silence. "Where are you going?" Britta asked him. "San Francisco," he said. She nodded in a way that meant she had no interest in such things, San Francisco specifically, but really the whole world outside Needles. He tried to imagine himself as Britta, spending his days interacting with people who were on the move, coming from or going to places that he had never seen, maybe never even heard of. Was it possible that she had not once felt the urge to pack up and follow, to solve the mystery of who Britta would become, in Columbus, Ohio, or Roanoke, Virginia? It seemed inconceivable to him to have no curiosity about one's parallel lives, those lives that different places would demand that you live. They sat in silence, he at the foot of the bed, and she in the chair beside the desk. He did not know what to say next. "Do you like working at the motel?" he asked finally. "It's okay," she said. It's kind of boring most of the time, but sometimes it's interesting. Give me an example of something interesting, he said, his teacher's voice never far away. Other than today, of course. Today wasn't interesting, she said. It was scary. I threw up afterward. Weren't you scared at all? Yes, he said. Actually, I was terrified. She smiled, and then she began to cry. Do you think we did the right thing, she asked. What do you mean? I don't know, she said. My boyfriend, Lex, he said that it was none of our business. And my boss is this Indian guy. He's all in a bad mood now because it's bad. He said it's bad for business for people to see the cops here. Erin's first impulse was to ask what her boss's ethnicity had to do with the rest of her statement, but he did not. He sensed no malice, and the question would only confuse her. Listen, he said sternly, we definitely did the right thing, okay? We saved a boy's life. His voice broke on the word saved. It seemed he had been waiting his whole life to save this boy, though he did not believe in fate, did not believe that everything in his 41 years had happened in order to bring him here, to a rundown motel in Needles, California, so that he might save Jacob. No, there were two separate facts. He had saved a life, and he was alone. He had never felt so tired.